It apparently makes no sense to keep talking about national literatures in a global world where mass market and the public taste have become the main criteria for judging books. National literature is now a very fragile, if not despicable, anachronistic concept, as has become, curiously enough, anything in literature daring to present itself as experimental. This is the first time I come to associate national and experimental literature, and I have to agree that it is indeed a strange association. A rather disturbing sense that had never crossed my mind before arises from this once improbable connection, now that good literature also has to be literature which travels well. As I recently heard from an editor, French literature doesn't travel well. And it is no coincidence that the French have been associated with more experimental or cerebral literature. I have never been a nationalistic writer myself. My books in Brazil are considered those of a writer who tries to escape any local or national constraint. Their language does not have a local accent. The stories I tell may take place as far from Brazil as in Mongolia, Russia, or Japan. And there is in these books a permanent suspicion about the truth behind any presumption of an identity, be it national, sexual, or even individual. All identity being considered in these novels and stories as fictional constructions. But I do think that with the growing demand for going global, we lost something which was taken for granted in the concept of national literatures, and that was the praise and acceptance of singularities and different traditions as a way of widening and enriching not only the very idea of what literature may be, but our perception of the world and the reality we live in. It would be the same as for an extinct language. I tend to believe that there are things or ways of thinking which could only be expressed in specific languages, things we would never be able to see if it weren't for languages long disappeared, like ancient Greek or Latin, for example, or even the extinct ones once spoken by Brazilian Indians. In other words, we may no longer be able to talk about national literatures, but neither will we be able to understand what we lose by giving up different literary traditions if we ignore the unifying process literature has undergone through the power of a few leading nations in order to respond to a potential international market in this globalized world. There is a clear geopolitical situation defining the boundaries of literature nowadays, what should be considered literature and what should not. We may say that it is the market, but we won't be saying much with that. The market is also a construct, and it is based on myriad elements and interests that happen to be still determined by nations. We are no longer in the old colonial days where the exotic cultures would have special interest to colonial powers. But we are in a world where the English language has acquired an unprecedented hegemony. You have experienced here the effects of this hegemony probably more than anyone else, since English has been adopted as your own language, at least by some of you, from colonization on. And you have made English your own, eventually enriching it with singularities, new variants, and a local tune. But there's still something difficult to understand. Once, talking to an Indian writer, I asked her why she wouldn't write in Hindi, since Hindi was her mother tongue, and she told me bluntly that only losers would do that. I must repeat that I'm not nostalgic for any kind of nationalism, and I'm not defending any nationalistic point of view, of course. I understand there may be a political statement in the choice of not writing in your own mother tongue. Beckett made a similar move when he chose to give up English and adopt French as his literary language, to avoid the facilities of style he would reproduce naturally in his own language. He made a choice for the poorness of style, for writing in a foreign language. But it seems to me that there may also be some crooked reasoning in choosing another language, especially when this language also happens to be the hegemonic one. How can a language define by itself if you're a loser or a winner in literature? Never mind that these are words which would fit much better in the realm of finance than in the world of literature. You may be thinking, why bother with all that? Why not simply sever these bonds of dependency with international models and criteria and begin taking care of your own internal affairs, as one American writer once told me? Why don't you Brazilians just give up all this resentment and begin to write literature as if we had never written any before? Why keep bothering with the international market or how Brazilian literature is received abroad, since we Brazilians don't read ourselves? Brazil is still a very illiterate country where people read an average of less than 4 books a year. And the answer is simple. There is a balance of powers and interests which tend to silence differences that may confront their imposed models. And if we don't take literature as simple entertainment and want to make the differences survive in this global world, we should assume this is not a problem for the public taste to solve. I wouldn't go so far as to say that realism is a specific English literary tradition. One can arguably reply that Tolstoy and Chekhov are greater masters of realism, properly speaking, than, say, James Joyce or Faulkner, even if the latter are also considered great realists, not to mention more contemporary and less clear ones like George Saunders and David Foster Wallace. But nonetheless, realism has become the hegemonic model for world literature today, to a great extent under the English language influence.
How do you think that new media technology or new technology is harmful to the culture, like in the local languages for local literature? Do you
harm
think yes,
how they harm?
Or is the enemy for the?
I think we tend to write in one only language, which is English in general. But it's on the other hand, we also change this language with our own singularity. So we write. If I write in English, I would write in a kind of bizarre English, and that would change it also. So I have some kind of influence over this major language. But I think there's a sense which guides the internet, is that the best or the better is also what is the most read. And I think this is bad for the culture I like. It's like giving. The criteria begins to be it's a market criteria. So it's like the more people read it, the better or the best is the book. And I don't believe in it. I think there are like great books which nobody reads, and they are very difficult to read, and they need to be studied. You have to be educated in order to be able to read them, and I think these books are the books which create rupture, and they widen the world, and they not only repeat what you already know. And I think there is I live in the internet, so I need it as I need nature now, but it's like I can't live without it, obviously. But I also think there's a principle in the net which is you only go for what you already know. You don't look for the unknown. You cannot find the unknown in the net. You may find it by chance once in a while, but it's not the rule. You go for what you already know. You go for your taste. Well, you don't. It's a very lazy approach. But you look for literature that you already know that you will like. So if I like science fiction, I would only look for science fiction. If I like some kind of novels, I would only look for these novels. Sometime it would pop up some different book in the middle of these books that I like, and that may be a surprise. But in general, you keep repeating itself. So it's a kind of reproduction. And I think it's not, what it's interesting for me in literature is the other way around. It's the possibility of ruptures and of cutting what you know and taking a different path.
How does Portuguese impact upon Brazilian writers? And then, if I'm not wrong, Portuguese in Portugal is different from Portuguese in Brazil. So, is there any symbiotic relationship between the two, or you are entirely on your own? Thank you.
There are differences between Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese, and but they are more like accent or different grammatical things, but not really nothing that we read each other with no problem. And it's it's more different of style and of accent. It's like speaking the language from different regions mostly.